that kind introduction, although I'm not sure how fair it is to have the data presentation follow deliciousness, but the energy is certainly high, and in a manner of speaking, I actually believe that data can be delicious as well. And so it's my goal by the time I get off here today that you all agree with me on that fact. But we have a lot of really cool takeaways to share this year. Here's today's agenda. I will recommend going in your booklet. You have the slides right there, so you can follow along in that way. And we also have an infographic that we created with some of the key takeaways that are at each of the tables around here as well. Just to go over real briefly the big takeaways we had, the majority of companies are increasing corporate contributions over time. So this is not new news at all. We've seen this over the past several decades. Corporate contributions have going up, but we're really happy to see it continuing this year, and we'll show some cool data about how it's going up and where it's going up as well. We've also found that employees are playing a really big role in this. We have some data both from the survey as well as from our CEOs that I'm happy to share with you here today from our Board of Boards conference that we had earlier this year. Companies are starting to measure the societal value of their contributions, and the final bullet has that business value that we think is really important as well. And so we're going to share some data there as well. Now, we only have 30 minutes, actually far less than that now. So I was hoping to have a Q&A at the end, but if we don't get to that, I want to make sure that if something doesn't make sense throughout, feel free to let me know. Feel free to wave your hand. Just let me know if I need to talk through something in a different way. If I don't see you, shout at me. We're in New York City. We shout here, so it's totally all right, and I'll be okay with you going in that direction. But to start, I wanted to thank all of the companies that responded to our survey this year. We had 261 companies respond. And this is a new record. As you can see, it's been generally increasing since we began back in 2001. And this equated to $25 billion in total giving. Now, that's a really large number. And for especially those that haven't been here before, when I talk about total giving, that includes both cash and in-kind contributions. So that's product donations, that's pro bono service. That includes those other areas of giving, inclusive of that cash then as well. So that's why that number is so large that we see there. But thank you all for participating in that survey and giving me something to talk about here today. The first question we often get asked is, how much do companies give? And we typically have focused historically on the median level of giving, which in this diagram you're able to see is at $18.5 million in 2013. That's what the median middle company. Now on this illustration, the reason we built this is that my favorite part about working with all of you throughout the year is that when I've shared this number and I've shared trends around median giving, and I hear so many times that, hey, our company doesn't want to be median, it doesn't want to be average, we want to be the best. So what do we got to do to be the best? And I imagine your employees are asking the same thing of you and your teams. And so we looked at quartiles, and we measured quartiles to understand the top 25% of companies and the bottom 25% of companies. And those are that top quartile and that bottom quartile. And we saw that the cutoff for the top quartile was at $53.8 million. Now again, that's total giving, cash plus in kind. As we move on and we look at other ways, because we know there's so many ways you can view the generosity of companies, if you are interested in only looking at cash giving, you can see that to be in that top quartile, your company would have had to give $35.5 million. Now, we have a great range of companies here, and it's all the largest companies in the world. But there's still a range in sizes of businesses. We have a lot around $2 billion in annual revenues. And we also have a lot that are in $100 billion in revenues and $400 billion of revenues. So it's important to look to the right side of this table as well and understand total giving as a percent of revenue and as a percent of pre-tax profit to normalize that if you're wanting to benchmark against a company that might be a lot smaller or a lot larger than yours. And so what we found with normalized giving, we found that to be in that top tier, essentially to be the most generous company in that top quartile, you would have had to give 0.22% of revenues or 1.95% of pre-tax profit. Now, by industry, we still wanted to give a taste of the benchmarking that we have here. So, this is just a taste of the kind of benchmarking that we can do. Margaret talked about Carmen Perez a lot, so she's my partner on the research team, and she can get this data in so many different ways. So here we have the median total giving as a percentage of pre-tax profit. If you're looking to even dig deeper into your industry, so if you're in consumer discretionary and you want to get at, well, what if we want to look only at consumer discretionary retail firms? We can get at that kind of detail for you, and we just ask that you reach out to us and let us know because we're excited to work with you. This is just the start of the conversation, but this is a great way for you to look at how much your company gives as a percentage of pre-tax profit and explore where you are in the range within your industry compared to the median. So now that we've talked about how much companies give, we also wanted to look at how corporate giving has changed in recent years. And so with that, we look first at our favorite way to look at how giving changed. We have this distribution chart. And so on here, you track along the bottom, and you're able to see the different percent changes we saw since 2010. So you might ask, well, why 2010? The reason is we wanted to look definitively post-recession. Last year, we told a big story about how giving evolved during the global recession that we saw centered around 2008 and 2009. And this year, we wanted to look past that and look over the past recent years at how giving has changed. And what we found is that 64% of companies are increasing giving. These are the companies on the right side where they're increasing in different tiers here. Now, this is important. This is inflation-adjusted numbers, so we did get them on the same year within that regard. And where we often like to go next is to look specifically at the far right of the chart that you have in front of you at these, what we're calling community investors for the sake of the conversation here today. These are the companies that are increasing their total giving by more than 10%, so 10 to 25 and then 25 and beyond since 2010. And on this next slide, we go to a table where we look specifically at those community investors, those companies giving more than 10% more than where they were in 2010. And we compare those to all other companies that are on that distribution chart. So everything that isn't circled here is a part of that group that's in all other companies. And we found a few interesting takeaways. We talked a lot last year about this growth in non-cash. The companies that are giving more are focusing a lot on non-cash giving. So this is that product donations. This is pro bono services are growing for a lot of companies, and that's taking up a bigger part of how the companies are increasing giving. Another interesting takeaway that we have here is cash is also increasing for these community investors. That was a change from last year where we found the companies that are actually increasing non-cash gifts are also more likely increasing their cash gifts as well. And we see that centered in the direct corporate cash account. So we're not seeing wide swings with the foundation giving. We're seeing that more with direct corporate cash giving, and that grew by 29% for this group. Now, we're not seeing foundations being shut down or anything like that. We've just found they're more steady over time, and if we see large increases, and I'll show where those increases are going in just a moment, it's coming from the direct corporate cash account. Now, looking at the bottom of this, we were intrigued by the growth that we saw in median revenues for this full set of companies. As revenues are indications of how business has changed over that time, what we found is that community investors had increased revenues of 11% since 2010, whereas all other companies were closer to flat with a negative 3% during that same time frame. Now, as we look back to all companies that are in our sample this year, we found that revenues have generally increased from 2010 to 2013. Now, you'll note in 2012 to 2013, we saw a dip, but we're still up after adjusting for inflation from where we were in 2010, so we've seen giving going up. So when we looked at this, we weren't necessarily surprised that giving had increased since 2010. But this next slide was where we actually found some surprise, and I know you'll think I'm a total nerd, but these numbers are very small changing, but this is giving as a percentage of revenue by year. And this is for companies that responded to our survey, and each year, that's what we mean by match set within this for all of these charts. And so while numerically we're seeing a small change here in giving as a percentage of revenue, the implications are huge. And the reason is that we know revenues are growing. So mathematically, we know that as revenues grow, for this proportion to change and increase by this much, giving is going to have to grow by that much more. So, for example, we talked about the median company having around $18 million in giving. Now, if their revenues were to grow 5%, to show this kind of change, their giving would have had to change by 15%. So it shows how much companies are investing into their community, even compared to how their businesses are growing. And we think this is important because we know at your companies, there are so many different opportunities for reinvesting your funds. They could go back into the business, they could go to shareholders, whatever that might be, but this indicates that communities are really getting prioritized by a wide variety of companies. Now, by industry, we actually saw a big takeaway here was that 92% of consumer staples companies have increased giving since 2010. That's almost all the companies that are within our match set from consumer staples. And a key driver behind that is the non-cash resources that I mentioned before. So we're finding that with a lot of these companies, they're taking that extra effort to get the product that otherwise might be thrown away into the hands of somebody that needs it. And what we've heard is that this is really a way to align with business strategies. So strategies around sustainability oftentimes have goals around limiting the amount of waste that goes to landfills. And so to align with that and to find a home for this product has been a priority for a lot of those companies that either make product or sell product in a big way as well. The number one reason we heard for companies giving more is that business performance is improving. So I showed a while ago revenues have been increasing for the median company. But we also heard within the qualitative responses that it's not just in the past. Some companies set their budget based on historical profits or revenues. But we also found that companies are projecting growth within their business in the future and staking a claim in the community now, and really focusing on that for why they're increasing giving on an annual basis. Now, this final text box here is an interesting one because we've heard a lot, especially over the past 5 years or so, about this increasing focus on strategy within corporate giving. And it's interesting because this is towards the bottom. We're looking at the companies that, or the industries that haven't had a lot of companies increasing giving. And essentially what we found is that more times than not, when we have cited reasons from companies for why they're giving change in one way or other, and they're talking about becoming more strategic, we've actually seen giving go down. Companies are moving away from areas that don't necessarily align with their business. And in a lot of cases, we've seen a huge move away from culture and arts in that way over the last several years. And we haven't seen the same kind of growth within the areas that they are now reinvesting to. So for companies that aren't increasing, that's one of the major reasons we saw for those changes. Now, this slide illustrates how we interpret the strategic giving conversation. And so the orange line shows the average grant size, or the median grant size, from 2010 to 2013. And this isn't a surprise. Giving has gone up for the majority of companies. You would expect grant sizes to increase. Now, the surprise is when you look at the blue line. This is the number of recipient organizations per grant maker, full-time equivalent, within your teams. So what we saw is back in 2010, the median grant maker worked with 63 recipients, and that's down to 50 in 2013. So that tells us about this environment in the nonprofit community where some nonprofits are really thriving and getting a lot of support, and then there's others that have stopped receiving support, and then they're being kind of on the other side in this environment of winners and losers within that. An interesting takeaway on this slide as well is you look at the spike in 2012. We found that this is likely driven in part by disaster relief giving. So in 2011, what we found is that there were major disasters that year, particularly in Japan, and disaster giving spiked in that year. But in 2012, there was also a lot of major disasters, particularly here in the US, including Hurricane Sandy. And so when we looked at the US Chamber of Commerce's, they have a disaster tracker over time, and we looked at companies and compared the years of how they supported different disasters. And what we found is that with the majority of companies filling out our survey based out of the United States, we were seeing how they were supporting international end recipients versus domestic end recipients. And what we found there is that in Japan, a lot of companies were giving a lot of money. This was a major disaster back in 2011. But they were often to 1 or 2 or 3 organizations. And what we found in the US with Hurricane Sandy is that they were making these large contributions as well, but they were also building relationships with local food banks, with local organizations their employees were engaged with, and on and on. So what we found is that is what led to that spike in a large part that year, but then we saw it come back down in 2013. Now, the next thing I want to talk about within this growth in giving is where contributions go. And I want to start by asking you a question. So get your poll device ready. And we want to ask this, and I just want to call out first off that when we talk about where contributions go, we're talking about cause area, but we're also talking about location. And the first question that I have here deals with the percentage of total contributions within your company that you estimate go to your home state, and if you're international, your home region. Now, we don't have data on this. So I'm asking you for an estimate within your own company about what percent goes to that. And we'll give 10 seconds and are interested to see the responses that we will get on this. Okay, just about out of time. All right, so a really wide range around there. It looks like number 3, 11 to 20% got the highest, and then the second highest is right there at 21 to 30%. So the reason we wanted to ask this was rather selfish on my behalf, but we get asked about this a lot. And we don't ask about this within our survey, and so we know it's something that we want to find data on. And I guess the key takeaway for you is that if this is something you're interested in learning about, or if there are other areas that we're not asking about, we're not talking about in our survey, please contact me. My email's at the end of this presentation, and I want to hear from you, and you can also come talk to me. I swear I'm not that bad of a guy. So would love to hear from you throughout the week, too, if there are certain areas that you'd like us to look into in the future. But we also wanted to look at cause area. When we pulled up by cause area, we found that education was the most popular program area for the second year in a row. Last year was the first year that we saw education as number 1. And this hasn't necessarily been driven by growth within companies. It's more as we've grown our sample and become more representative. What we found is that total education support is so big for so many companies out there. And as we expand globally and we expand to further reaching parts of the country, we're just finding that it's naturally become a very major part of a lot of different companies' types of programs. Now, year-over-year trends within overall program area giving, we found that the fastest growing area was in community and economic development. This was up 34% in 2013 compared to 2010. And we showed the aggregate amounts here because we wanted to spotlight, again, the corporate direct cash, which is down in the bottom. It's that dark blue. And you can see that that is the area that's grown. And then as you add them all up on 2013, on the far right of this chart, you're able to see it was more than $1 billion in support for community and economic development. And that's compared to less than $800 million back in 2010. And we've seen this growth specifically within that corporate cash areas. And the interesting thing here too is that this isn't just financials. Financials have obviously been playing a big part in this, but it's across a lot of different industries that are working in areas like workforce readiness, which aligns with that focus on education that a lot of companies have, focus on financial capabilities development, as well as empowering marginalized communities in developing or emerging economies. And that leads to the next point that we have on here, that we've actually seen international giving grow over time as well. So this is mainly consists of manufacturing companies are driving a lot of this growth, and a lot of that is in Asia and the Pacific, where they're running a lot of their different operations just generally within our overall program. And an interesting part as we dug into where those funds were going internationally was that environmental support was a lot higher internationally than it was domestically. And again, thinking that 92% of our samples in the US, we know from talking to a lot of our companies that there isn't necessarily a lot of environmental grant making sometimes within companies, because they're trying to improve their operations and the sustainability of their supply chains, and that's how they're going to be making their difference. What we're finding is that we're not seeing that as much internationally, perhaps because they may lack the infrastructure to invest in that sustainability initiative the same. So to make that kind of difference, they're making grants internationally where they're expanding their businesses. Now, we have a lot more information on global giving trends. I would recommend downloading Giving Around the Globe if you haven't yet. This is a terrific report. It's written by my partner on the research and measurement team, Carmen Perez. Carmen, are you here? She's around here somewhere. I know she is. Say hi. So she's awesome, and she's really fun to talk to, and she knows so much stuff about international and global giving. So I would recommend downloading this, but even more than that, I would recommend talking to her if you have a chance. And I'm going to introduce the next sessions in just when I'm done with this presentation, and she's moderating a session on giving in India and China. So I would definitely recommend chatting with her, and you can look forward to having more results and reports like this in the future from CECP and Carmen. Now on to the role of employees in corporate giving. So this is a really hot topic, especially as media asks us a lot about trends within the field. And once again, I want to start with a poll question among you all, and it's the same poll question that we asked your CEOs, your bosses, at our Board of Boards conference. And so I'm going to pull it up here, and what we want to know is about the encouragement from which stakeholder group would matter most in a decision to expand your company's investment in the community. Among this group of stakeholder groups, which one would have the biggest difference on whether or not you're going to invest more or less? We'd love to hear from you. All right, we're out of time. Board of directors, number one at 42%, followed by 22% employees. That is a really interesting takeaway, and it aligns with what I expected when this question would be asked among the CEOs as well. And so what we found here, and as well as customers, I was actually very interested in the fact that customers fell behind some of these groups as well. I'm trying to push on. As we move on, we asked the same question among our CEOs at the Board of Board conferences, and we had a really interesting takeaway. As you can see on the slide, employees were number one at 36%. I also love the big fat zero for government. Even media got 3%, and so I thought that was a really interesting takeaway as we looked at that. But the clear takeaway here was that employees have truly taken center stage in the development of our field. And so we wanted to look at this and explore the role of employees more in this creation of social value that we know your companies do in so many ways, and that grant making is just one piece of that. And one thing I'll say is that CCP advocates for you all year round. And it's not just the EA winners who are awesome, and we really enjoy talking about them, but it's all of you. We think you're doing great things. If you ever hear Sarah Adams talking within our office from communications, she talks so much about how companies go beyond checkbook philanthropy and do so much. And so that's where we wanted to look not only at CECP's total giving, that cash plus in-kind contributions that I've been talking about up until this point, but to get that full effect, focused on that lifeline of your businesses, the employees, we wanted to understand the employee effect as well. So we looked both at employee gifts that are leveraged to your companies, oftentimes through payroll deductions and encouraged by matching gifts, but also employee volunteer time. And this employee volunteer time is specifically on company time, because we know that can play a big role on that, and we can get a value at that. We work with the independent sector for that volunteerism to understand the overall dollar value of volunteering, especially when it's on company time. And what we found is that when you put it all together and you get statistics behind it, we found that the employee effect was really large. It was 23% of the overall value that companies are bringing to society. And so we know there are other things. There's customers that you work with. You're adding jobs all the time. There's so much value, but focused on the employees, we found that is a really significant portion. And so it suggests that companies that are encouraging donations through matching gift programs or offering time off to go and volunteer for a cause your company cares about and your employees care about, they're adding this multiplier effect to the overall value they're able to bring to society. So a common next question is, how many companies are offering paid release time or volunteer time off? And we found that in 2013, 59% of companies were giving time off to go and volunteer. That's up from 51% back in 2010. And I also included on this chart pro bono service, because that's been another fast-growing program, especially over the last couple years, where we've seen more and more companies focusing on the development of paid release time volunteerism, but also this pro bono service. And it shows us that this isn't all about making your employees happy, although that's obviously very important, but it's also about driving impact in communities using the skills that you're developing within your business. And to no surprise, what we found is that employees are taking advantage of these. I know I would. This is fun. You get to go and volunteer during work hours. But this aligns with things that we heard from United Health Group. We released a report last year that showed that this is not only good for employees, it's good for business as well. It makes employees happy, but it also can improve skills over time too. So that's something that we know companies are keeping an eye on over time. For the very first time, we included a required question on matching gifts. And so we asked, even if you can't share the data with us, did you offer any type of matching gift? And we found that 86% of companies are offering matching gifts in 2013. And that's a really high number. That's the great majority, and it's actually more than the number of companies that are running a foundation, which was another required question that we had this year. So we can see that this is an area that is of great interest, and we also asked very specific questions that we're going to get into in a deep way in giving and numbers, where we looked at how companies are strategically focusing matching gifts. So this doesn't necessarily take away from your strategy. We learned that the majority of companies are focusing to specific nonprofit partners, or to specific cause areas that align with business strategies, and you're able to see the different types of programs that were most popular there. So we're going to close the employee engagement section with one final poll question. We wanted to ask which tactic you believe is the most effective for increasing employee satisfaction with your company. All right, 7 seconds. Very interesting. So number 3, volunteer time off at 47% blew the other ones away. That's really interesting, especially because we know that only 59% of companies within our match set are offering these types of programs. So that shows the weight that's going on this and why it's trending upward so much with that focus on volunteer time off. We also asked a number of questions on how companies are measuring the value of their employee volunteerism, and what we found most often is that companies were looking at job satisfaction ratings, skills development, corporate reputation scores, things of that matter. And so if you're ever interested in benchmarking more on those topics, we're happy to share with you some of the results we got there for how companies are looking strategically at the effect this is having on business. Which leads very nicely to the next point. We wanted to look also at how companies are measuring the value of corporate contributions. We released Measuring the Value of Corporate Philanthropy back in 2010, so at the start of our match set. We released that report to offer guidance on how to start measuring the societal value, but also the business value. And so in this year's survey, we were really excited to ask where companies were, how they were doing it, and if they were even doing it. And what we found is that in terms of measuring societal outcomes and or impacts, 76% of companies were doing this in some capacity. And this aligns with the Nonprofit Finance Fund, which just released a report about the nonprofit industry that found that 70% of grantees were getting asked for impact metrics within theirs. And the encouraging part about that was that in that report from Nonprofit Finance Fund, the majority of those companies, I think it was 70-some%, found those impact metrics useful. They were actually using it for continuous improvement within their overall programs. So we think this is a very positive thing, and we're really excited about what it means for the future. Now, we did find that the majority of companies are new to this, and the majority of companies want to do it a lot better than they are right now. So this is something that we see as an opportunity in the future to work with you, to consider how companies are doing this and the types of grants that they're doing it for. So measuring the impact isn't necessarily for all grants that you're writing. We found the majority of companies are focusing to very specific grants. Number 1, a lot are focusing to a specific cause area. Also a specific threshold of overall giving. So we found the average threshold was about $100,000. Any grant higher than that was requiring nonprofits to provide impact metrics back from those investments that you're making in the communities. But the most companies were measuring specifically for a signature program, or what we've been calling a strategic program. And we wanted to briefly show you specifically within these companies the resources that they were using. So what we found is that just over a quarter of companies were using consulting firms. And a lot of them were using a mix and match of all of these. So that's why this won't add up to 100%. And we found that it really differs by cause area, by industry, and so on. So this is another area where I would recommend that you reach out to me and you reach out to Carmen, who leads all the reporting and the benchmarking work, to help you assess within your cause area or within your group of companies about how this is evolving even within your industry, if that's an area that you're interested in too. So again, with a lot of this stuff, this is just the start of the conversation. We're excited to keep speaking with you in the future about that. Now, this all leads to the million-dollar question, which we are yet to be able to answer, about whether or not this is good for business. Is this going to improve business in the long run? And we at CECP believe it is. And so we looked at those quartiles that I talked about before back in 2010, and saw the companies that were in those quartiles, in the top and the bottom quartile, and measured the ones that responded to our survey over 4 years. And what we found is that the most generous companies were earning more, both in revenues and profits, by 2013, and that was a really exciting takeaway for us. Now, we can't prove causation on this. There's so many other things that play into this, but we think it's a cool indication that we can lean on in the future for how this is, and this is quoting Terrence Lim, how these philanthropic strategies can be successful in creating long-term business value. And if you read that report, it's back from 2010, but it's a great report and has a lot of information about measuring the value not only of grants, but specifically looking at employee engagement and areas like that as well. So that's what I have. I am officially out of time, but I do want to say that take these key takeaways back to your teams. Would love to hear from you, would love to come present to your teams if it's something that's of interest that your teams would be wanting to learn about. And also, utilize our benchmarking. I talked about Carmen a lot. Our online system is updated with 2013 data right now, so you can go in and see the benchmarking information that we have in there. That led to all these key takeaways that we have here that we're going to be, again, reporting on and giving in numbers, which will be released later this year. And finally, I want to just give a call out, a special thanks to you all, but also to Kate Crisali, who was our intern this year and helped with a lot of the research that was put into this. She's in the back. She's took an internship with JP Morgan this summer, and if you get a chance to talk to her, she's really cool too. So I would recommend having a conversation with her, and we look forward to hearing from you all over the next year. This is just the start of the conversation. So I'm actually, thank you. At the back of this presentation in your folders, you can find the participants and everybody who's included in the research findings that we had here.